The movie begins with a narrator speaking about World War III. It came and wiped out most of civilization. The force Grammaton is then mentioned. It is a new arm of the law that sets out to destroy the cruelty in humanity. We see a decent number of people in a building gathering their weapons. Then the police come to the outside of that building and start shooting at it. The people inside fire back. More specialized police then arrive and bust through the building. The people in the building seem to be outnumbered and losing. Then two males come out of a car from the police side. They seem to have some special status. They enter the building, and one of them runs through the hallway and busts open a door where a lot of the other people hide. They shoot at him, but he is untouched. He stands up confidently, and the lights go out for everyone. While they are out, one of the people is heard asking if anybody hit him. Seconds of no shooting go by, and then, the man who broke through unleashes a flurry of ammo at them from his machine guns. He is ruthlessly skillful in his shooting, not moving any part of himself except for his arms. When he is done firing, the rest of the force comes in. Dead bodies cover the floor, and not a single person is shown to have survived that onslaught. In the next scene, the man who did the shooting is in another room. He looks at the floor there and says this is it. Police come to it and begin to break it. Once they do, they push away the rubble and uncover invaluable paintings. One of them is the Mona Lisa. A man then comes in and scans it with some device. After he finishes, he confirms that the painting is real. The main man, John Preston, then gives an order to burn the paintings. Two people then come in wearing fire-resistant suits and burn them with flamethrowers. The next scene has John riding in a car with his friend Partridge. He asks John how long it will take until it's all gone, until it's all burned. And John replies that they will get it one day. We then see a city from an overhead view. The word Libria gets mentioned. It is the country that they belong to. Their car then enters that city. While the city is slowly being revealed to us, a voiceover speaks of the bad side of human nature. The badness of anger, for instance, and war. We then see the man that is speaking. He speaks to many, and many listen. He states that the disease is human emotion, and that disease gets suppressed by prosium. We then see how all the civilians inject themselves with a small device. The man then says that Librians have won, and when he does, they all applaud. But ironically, the whole city looks nothing short of oppressive. Back in the car, Partridge injects himself with prosium. Then so does John. After the car ride, John enters a building. There he speaks before a man known as the Vice Council. The council calls John cleric. He asks him if he has a family, and John says that he does. When he is asked if he has a wife, John says that she died 4 years ago for something known as sense offense. Then the council asks John how he felt about it. But John does not understand the question. This causes the council to repeat himself. At that point, John tells him that he does not feel anything. Why did he miss it then, is what the council asks next. John hesitates to answer but then says that he does not know. The vice council then says his behavior is nearly unforgivable. Then he lets John go. After having left the building, John plays a piece of a conversation he and Partridge had in the car on his computer. This prompts him to visit some data keeper to see if his companion Partridge logged anything. The data keeper tells him that Partridge has not brought anything in for weeks. John says that the keeper is mistaken. Partridge should have brought in a book. The data keeper then shows John the big record book, and there is nothing of that sort on it. After seeing the absence of any entry, John leaves. In the next scene, John is sitting in a car by the city's gate. The guard there tells him that Partridge has been passing through into the Nether every night for the last 2 weeks. When John arrives where Partridge is at, he sees him reading a book there. John then comes to him, and Partridge says to him that John always knew about it. John takes out his gun and says that he will try to make them go easy on him. But Partridge tells him that they never do, to which John says that he is sorry. Partridge denies that he is, stating his use of the word as being vestigial. He then says that all that they are as humans has been traded away for no assassination and no wars. Those horrible happenings are a heavy cost for the ability to remain human, but a cost he states to pay gladly. Upon hearing that, John points his gun at him. Partridge hides from it behind his book, and then John shoots his companion, sending him to an early grave. Back in the car, John's driver speaks with him. He tells John that he would one day like to be as uncompromising as John then comes home, and we see his son call him by his name. Then he tells his father that he saw some boy cry and asks if he should report him. John says that he should unquestionably. Afterward, the son goes back to watching propaganda. While lying in bed, John remembers a quote that Partridge told him before his life was taken, and then he dreams of his wife. He dreams about how police broke into his house and tried to take his wife away. John tried attacking one of them, but then that officer told him that they have a warrant for her arrest. She made a sense offense. She kisses John, and then they take her away. Then John wakes up. The propaganda is still faintly playing in the other room. He looks at his wife's empty bed, and it is uncertain how much he feels from that sight. In the restroom, he drops his prosium on the floor by accident. His son then comes behind him and asks John what he is doing. John tells him what happened, and then his son tells him what he should do about it. John agrees with his son. The next scene has him coming to a building, but due to stated culprit activity, the building is closed at the moment. His driver then comes by in the car and tells John to get in. He asks John about the lines in the building, but John seems to lie to him by telling him they are fine. He did not get his dose of prosium. John and his force then break into a female's house. John asks her how long she has been off the dose. Then they break her wall and find a colorful modern room to be hidden behind it. John searches it and tells her they will find what they need to. Then the lady takes the gun of one of the officers. She tries to shoot John, and his driver tries to shoot her, but John stops him from doing so, and likewise, the officer also stops the lady. John then tells his driver, whose name is Brandt, that they need her. In an interrogation room, John gives the lady her dose of prosium. Then he asks her who her friends are, but she questions if he knows what that word means. After that, she grabs his hand and asks him why he is alive. He lets go of her grasp. Then he tries to answer, but it takes him a while to produce his response. When he does, he gives a very formal answer that instantly disappoints the female sitting before him. She then talks about how the feeling is everything, that without it, a person is just a ticking clock. This prompts John the cleric to tell her that she has to go to a department for processing. After that, we see a room of males engaging in some advanced practice for combat. They are called the gun katas. Then at John's home, John looks at his prosium dose on the restroom sink. He then puts it into his injecting gun. Later, he remembers the words of the lady in the interrogation room, how she told him that without feelings life is pointless. And then we see that it was a dream rather than a memory because John wakes up in a panic after he had an image of her possible execution. After having woken up, he tries looking at the rain happening behind his window, but he cannot see it too well because it is covered by some paper. He comes to it and peels it off. He then sees the rain falling down on his window, and even more so, on the city. He is filled with awe, and this is just after skipping one day of prosium. He then runs back to the restroom to take the injecting gun in his hand and points it at himself. He is scared of what he is feeling because he knows where it could lead to. And then we do not see whether he injects or not. John stands in a crowd of people. The man that delivers the propaganda speaks to them all about the benefits of prosium. He mentions the negative emotions that disappeared, and also the positive ones that had to go at the price. We then see a hand let go of its prosium doses, and then how they lie on the ground. We see that it was John that did it. Afterward, the crowd starts walking forward. As they walk, John begins to watch them. We see that he is somewhat starting to disassociate from their robotic ways. He takes off his glove and runs it across a rail in the process of walking upstairs. He feels the sensation on his hand, the world that he belongs to. Then he arrives and sits at his desk. While he sits there, we hear more propaganda playing in the background. John takes several items on his desk and rearranges them. Then Brandt comes in and asks him what he is doing, but he just says that he is optimizing his desk. After that, Brandt tells him about sense offenders out in the Nether. They go there and engage in combat. Many people lose their lives. When John takes out a particular individual that clung to him, he feels the blood on his hands. It seems like it is the first time he feels like he has taken someone's life. Afterward, he enters a room. It is another room with individuality that does not conform to Libria's standards. John walks along that room, touching the items there with his hand. He then takes a vinyl record of Beethoven and turns it on. Before the music starts playing, he touches a crystal ball. He inspects it and tries to get something out of it. And then Beethoven begins to play. He turns around to look at it and drops the crystal ball. It seems like he has never been moved by anything like that in his life. It causes him to sit down in a chair and cry. Later, outside the building, we see John looking into one of its windows, watching that room burn. Grant comes to him and asks him what will happen to people like them when they've finished burning all that they should. But before John could answer, they get called to deal with some animals. When they get there, the animals we see are dogs. Grant orders the force to exterminate them. And while they engage in extermination, John feels negatively impacted by every shot fired. However, one puppy escapes and lands in John's hands. While he holds it, the puppy licks him. They tell John to let them handle it, but he keeps holding it, trying to understand what it is and what really needs to be done. Eventually, he ends up saving it by coming up with the excuse that they should test it for disease. He explains that if there are diseases out in the Nether, then they best know about them. The next scene has John speaking to the Vice Council. The council tells him that there is no longer a process for sense offenders. They are to be put to eternal sleep on sight without trial. John says that doing it that way is counter to the law. But then the council tells him that is the will of Father, and he is the law. After that, we see that John is angry as he clenches his fist. Back on his computer, he looks at the image of the lady that he arrested earlier, Mary. He goes to the data keep and asks for confiscated evidence belonging to her. He gets them and looks through them. As he does, he feels again. He then takes a small red piece of fabric into his pocket. After that, he personally drives out to the Nether. As he exits the gate, Brandt sees him. When John arrives at the place he wanted to, he goes to his trunk and takes out that puppy he saved. He sets it down and tells it to go. But when he sits back inside his car, the puppy stays near his door. This causes John to feel for it, and so he gets out and puts it back in the trunk. While it's there, he takes his coat off and lets the puppy lie on it. He then pets it, and by doing so, it seems like he has transitioned into feeling quite strongly. Then Gramerton arrives and tells him to step away from the car. One particular officer comes to John and asks him for his ID. John tells him that it is in his coat, and his coat is not there. The officer then tells him that all unidentified persons are subject to being destroyed. But John tells him that he's a Gramerton cleric, first class. Regardless of that, the officer orders that his car be searched. Then John's car keys get taken, and his trunk starts getting opened. When it gets slightly opened, the commanding officer tells the other to stand off because he then recognized that it was John. He then apologizes and the Gramerton starts leaving. While they start walking away, the puppy makes a sound. The officer asks John what that was, and John responds that the nether is full of animal. But the officer states that it sounded like it came from John's trunk. John denies it, but the officer takes his keys and checks. When they find the puppy there, they try to put him to eternal sleep. But John responds by offering them relentless resistance. He takes their guns and fires away at them with the same level of high-quality skill that he did much earlier to the sense offenders. They do not stand a chance against him and all get annihilated. Afterward, he takes the puppy in his hands. Back at his home, John looks at his prosium doses. He then looks at his mirror and starts taking it off. When he does, he sets his doses behind the mirror with the pipes. Then we see him practicing the katas alone. He is perhaps doing it to clear his mind. But then we see Brant appear and start sparring with him. They speak while they engage in the art. Brant then tells him that it is his job to know what John is thinking. And John responds to that by saying, "What is it then?" It is about the murders out in the nether last night is what Brant tells him. He then tells John there are some theories as to what happened out there, and then he adds that he's glad it happened. John asks him why, and Brant answers that due to that incident, Father and the council have decided to put a faster end to those that resist the laws of Libria. He tells John that there will be a massacre, and he finishes by saying that there is a raid somewhere in the nether, and that they need to get to it. We see John there along with many Gramerton troops. They fire their guns and cause a lot of mayhem. Soon after, a gun gets pointed at the back of John's head, but John quickly turns around and stops it. After seeing that there are several offenders behind him, he tries to rescue them by telling them where to go, but they are confused and scared, so he tells them to follow him. They then all walk along the area and John fights his own personnel, and when more come in, he fights them too. Again, even though he is alone, they do not pose a threat to him, and he handles half a dozen of his own with incredible skill. After that, John takes the people he tried to rescue to a certain area. But what awaits them there, and John too, is Brant. He quickly tells John that he drove them into his trap. Then he says to John that he executes them. John then says they should probably take them in for interrogation. But Brant repeats the new law that offenders should be shot on sight. Then he gives John his gun, saying that if he is low on ammo he could use his. John takes it and fiddles with the safety button. He waits a while and then says no. He gives Brant back his gun and says that he should have it instead. After that, Brant orders his troops to shoot the sense offenders. John leaves while they get executed. In the next scene, we see John speaking to the vice consul. He tells him that he is ready to be used by Father as best as he can. He adds that he wants to locate the underground, and the council asks him if it is to destroy it. John gives a positive to that. Then the scene changes to him sitting in a room with the dead Partridge. John says sorry to him. Then he looks through his photos. He finds a photo there with the word freedom written on its backside. After that, he speaks to prisoner Mary about Partridge. She tells him that she does not know who he is. But then he shows her a photo of her with him. And then John tells her that Partridge is dead because he eliminated him. This causes Mary to take a pen there and try to stab John with it. But he stops her. Before he exits the room, he tells her that they were lovers. John then sits at his table. The propaganda continues to play in the background while he looks at the photo of Partridge and Mary. He then enters a classroom and asks the teacher there to tell him about Partridge. John orders the students that they all leave the room. Then he takes the man, who does not comply properly with John, and slams him on a table. John accuses him of being an offender and asks about Partridge again. The man tells him that he came there sometimes with a man named Jurgen. This causes John to let go of him. But then he takes him again and slams him through a bookcase. The man breaks into another room. John walks inside and tries to find something there. While he walks, a man says from behind that they have been watching him. John turns around and sees the man. He then states that he must be Jurgen. Jurgen asks John if he knew why he came here. When he says this, he uses a remote device to open a floor door. Then he welcomes him to the underground. The next scene has John sitting and attached to a polygraph test. Jurgen says that it is necessary for them to be safe. He says Mary's name, and we see that an emotional response was emitted from John. Then he mentions that her red ribbon is in his pocket and that he breathes it in sometimes. John then tells him that she is scheduled for combustion on the next day, and Jurgen states that he knows. In another room, Jurgen tells him that emotion has its price. He says that emotions are chaos if not kept under control. Then he adds that some people have to lose feelings so that some others can have it. John then responds by asking what he could do about this, and Jurgen answers that he can eliminate Father. In the next scene, John runs through a crowd of passersby to get somewhere. When he does, some Gramaton officers arrive and tell him to come with them right away. They bring him to the Vice Council. In there, the council tells John that he heard a rumor that some member of the force refuses to take his prosium dose. Then he gets angry and slams a desk with his hand. He asks if John is playing with him, and John says no. John then states that he is making attempts to contact the resistance, but the council asks how he hopes to expose the traitor if he only makes attempts. To this, John can only say that he will find the traitor and the resistance, and subject them to the laws of Libria. After that, he is allowed to leave. We then see him at his house, putting more of his doses behind the mirror. After that, he sits in his kid's room. He looks at his son's doses, and then his son wakes up and asks John what he's doing. He says that he is checking if his son is taking them. The boy responds that he is, and then goes back to sleep. Later, he is in the interrogation room with Mary. She asks him why he is there with her. Then she asks if he will dose her. After his lack of a response, she realizes that he is someone who has come to feel. Then Mary asks him what he will do, and he answers that he doesn't know. Their hands slowly come together until they touch on the table. At the underground, John speaks with Jurgen. They speak about John's attempt to eliminate Father, and John speaks about the supreme difficulty of it. But regardless of that, he says that he will try to do it. He then stands somewhere and watches Mary on the television as she puts on a red robe with many guards surrounding her. She is likely getting prepared for combustion. At his desk then, John asks his computer to pull up files of his wife. He asks to see her sentencing to combustion. He watches it, and he sees himself there. Then he runs out of the area. As he runs, we see Mary getting ready for combustion. The scenes switch back and forth between him running to Mary and her approaching her final moment. When John finally gets near, he tells the guards there that he needs to speak with her. But they tell him that it is too late. Combustion is about to commence. He sees her through the crevice, and then the flames turn on. John walks out of the building and falls to the ground. He then starts crying in the eyesight of many people. But Brandt is the person who approaches him. He then instantly puts him under arrest for feeling. He then takes him into a room with some people and reveals to them who he is. John gets hit by Brandt there several times. After that, he brings John to the Vice Council. In there, he tells him of his crimes. John responds by saying that it is true that there is a cleric that has betrayed the law of Libria, and then he states that that cleric is Brandt. Brandt instantly denies it, but then the council shows on his computer that it was his gun that was used in the shootings at the Nether. But Brandt says that John switched their guns. He then gets taken away by the guards, and while he does, he yells that there was a mistake. After that, the council comes to John and says that since a complaint was filed against him, the law states that John's premises be searched. John agrees to it since it's the law. He then says to the council that the only problem he has is that he has never met Father. The council reacts by saying that Father does not grant an audience. But John responds by saying that he will bring him the resistance. Surely he can make a special case for him. With that, the council unlocks his handcuffs. In the following scene, John runs to his room. When he gets there, 2 personnel stand near his door, telling him that a search is already taking place inside. John walks into his home and then opens the mirror. But much to his chagrin, his doses have disappeared. His son then comes up behind him and shows John his doses. He adds that he should be more careful when hiding them. To that, John asks him how long has he been doing this, and his son answers since Mom went away. Then John asks him how he knew. It is his job to know what he is thinking, says the boy. The scene changes to John sitting at a table in the underground. He makes a call stating that he located the resistance. Afterward, we see the law take away members of the underground and put them in a vehicle. Later, John is dressed in a sophisticated white suit as he walks with some officials to meet with Father. The official explains to him what protocols he needs to take when in the presence of such an important figure, and then he mentions the test. John acts slightly surprised upon hearing about it, but then walks into a room to take it. He gives his weapon to a guard and then enters another room. They sit him down for a polygraph test. When he gets asked a question by some official, Brandt appears and answers it for him. Father then starts speaking to John through the television. He tells him that for years he wanted to create someone that would infiltrate the underground. But in order for them to trust him, he would have to feel like them. John then asks him how he used him if they never even met. That is when Father transforms into the Vice Council. After that, he tells him that they have met, and for a long time. He adds that Father has been dead for a long time and that he has been appointed to carry out his legacy. The polygraph reading then goes completely straight. This leads to John summoning 2 guns from his sleeves. He eliminates the guards in that room with little effort. He then enters another room and starts doing the same with his gun kata skill. He sends over 12 additional guards to their doom. Having attained such a skillful victory, he enters the room where the Vice Council sits. Brandt is there by the council's side. John drops his gun and walks toward them. Several guards then come to him with swords. He takes one of their swords and starts doing battle with them. After some seconds, the personal guards of the council have all been laid to rest. This prompts Brant to take a sword and get ready to fight with the man causing so much trouble. But it takes almost no time for John to put an end to Brant's arrogant words. The vice consul himself then reaches for his gun and tries shooting John, but John quickly disallows for his bullet to hit him. They both engage in a sort of acrobatic fight, where neither of them is really hitting each other, but instead just blocking and attempting to grab the other. Eventually, the acrobatics end when John breaks free and points a gun at the council. When he does, the council tells him that he feels. He then tells John that if he will take it after now knowing what having feelings can bring. He adds if it is worth the price, and John just repeats the words of his previous friend, Partridge. He tells him that he will pay it gladly, and then he fires at the vice consul, ending him and Father's legacy. Afterward, he leaves that room and enters another. In that room, he destroys every television of Father delivering his propaganda. We then see the holographic image of Father in the city disappear. And after that, members of the underground come out and do battle with Grammett and guards. John holds Mary's ribbon in his hand and smiles because freedom has returned to humanity.